What is up? This is the Leafs Convo podcast presented by Oakridge Ford, oakridgeford.com. I'm your host, Norm James, in London, Ontario, joined as always by the one and only Michael Piagello in Buffalo, New York. Michael, the Leafs 2-0-1 after falling to the rival Montreal Canadiens 6-5 in a shootout. The Leafs were up 4-1 in the game, and the Habs came back with 4 goals in the third. I know it's early. I know these are the kinds of contests that we usually see from these two teams, but I did not like what I saw there at Scotiabank Arena Saturday night. However, they got the tick. Time to move on to St. Louis, right?
Good morning, Norm. Well, that's what Mike Babcock indicated after the game. 5 out of 6 points, 3 out of a possible 4 in back-to-back. Going in, if you got that, would you take it? Sure. But yeah, when you're up 4-1 in the third period, and you're not dominating, but Montreal, I don't think, is a great team. They're a good team, and with a great goaltender and a couple pretty good defensemen. One who's probably a Hall of Famer in Shea Weber. You got to step on their throat, and the problem is that I think the Leafs ran out of gas around the end of the second, early third period, and made some really dumb mistakes in the third. Most of the biggest one being the Kapanen throwing of his stick at Jeff Petrie while killing a penalty, causing the penalty shot, and then Petrie scores the tying goal on the penalty shot. And, it was just, that was a collapse of epic proportions. But if you're talking about being overly concerned, it is the first week of October, and they are 2-0-1.
I was thinking this team would be 3-0 and drawing up all these scenarios where the team is just unbelievably dominant and only going to get in its way if failure loomed. Well, that's an indication of how it could go, and it came a lot sooner. And maybe it's a good thing that the team's blemishes and issues aren't rearing their ugly heads, but are prevalent in the early going, because it's a lot easier to modify these things and fix them after having seen them soon, as opposed to having them appear when you least expect them to down the stretch, and when they probably cause a lot more damage than they do now.
Well, I think, there are areas that Babcock needs to be concerned. One, twice on home ice, they give up the opening goal very early, and that's something we saw at times last year.
Yeah,
against Ottawa, 25 seconds in. I think it was Brady Tkachuk that scored on Saturday. A minute and 8 into the first period, they're down 1-0. Now they responded; they took the 4-1 lead, but you don't want to dig yourself an early hole. They're so gifted offensively that they probably think, okay, that's no big deal. We can just come back from that. But that's not a trend you want to set. And it's also something that when things get tighter at the end of the year and in the playoffs, you don't want to be giving up the opening goal and infuse your opposition with confidence. So that's something that needs to be nipped in the bud pretty quickly.
Yeah, no doubt. This is the Leafs Convo podcast for Oakridge Ford in London, Ontario. 0% financing is back, plus free winter tires, free 55-inch smart 4K TV, all kinds of stuff. Message me in the community section for more details. I'll get you into a new Ford real quick. Max Domi back in Toronto. He is what Nazem Kadri was. Born a Leaf fan, born into the Leafs life. Now playing for the Habs, a team he never probably wanted to play for or dreamt of playing for, but he's there trying to make the most of it. He had a chance to score 5 or 6 goals in the third period on Saturday night. Gets the curtain raiser. That kind of thing is going to happen when an ex-Toronto guy or a Toronto-born and bred player comes back to the Mecca, and he's skating and on all cylinders, ready to go. So you knew he was going to do that. The Leafs are able to negate a lot of what comes their way early, as you said, Mike, with the offensive giftedness that they exude. But the lapse down the stretch, whether you're the most gifted team in the league or not, you're susceptible to those sorts of things. And yeah, it was ugly to watch. Kasperi Kapanen, I don't want to totally annihilate the guy. But is he that upset that his stick broke and he just can't control himself in that situation? Like, it's just such an impulsive thing to do, an instinctual thing to do, that it's hard to blame him because there's really nothing he could have done about it. He was going to just react that way no matter what.
Well, no, I don't agree. If that's his instinct, then it needs to be eliminated.
But why
from
do
his
it,
brain.
though? Why do that? I don't think he could stop himself in that moment. It was just so dumb and out of place.
Well, yeah, and after the game, like when asked for an explanation, he just said it was a mistake. It's like, okay, well, that's great, but your team, and he didn't even know that it would be a penalty shot. His stick was broke by the shot, and he responds by throwing the shaft of the stick at the player at the point. There are all kinds of dumb in this league, but that's one of the dumbest things. And Jeff Petrie isn't exactly Connor McDavid on breakaways, but when you're going one-on-one, and he's a fairly skilled defenseman, and he beat Hutchinson cleanly on that one. Maybe you need a save from your goaltender, and if it was Freddie Anderson, he would have done that. But I'm not going to lay blame on Hutchinson because Mike Babcock didn't lay blame on Hutchinson. He blamed the team around him, sort of letting the side down, and it was a bad mistake. And hopefully he thinks before he does it again. I know that, like, going into the season, Kapanen talked about the missing quotient that is not there on this roster, the pushback, because Kadri was gone, and that he was going to step up and try to be more physical. Well, you can be more physical and not be stupid, and that was a Kadrian play.
You can't use any weapons, Kasperi. You can't throw your stick. Why did you throw your stick? Again, it goes back to just an instinct he could not control. And what else is he going to say? It was an instinct that he couldn't control. We all know that. It was a mistake. He better not do it again. It was just so frustrating to watch. That third period was a bit of a dog's breakfast. But the Habs are hungry to come into Toronto, beat the Maple Leafs. It's like the shoes on the other foot. Several years ago, the Habs had the run of the play, and the Leafs would go into Centre Bell and give it their all and usually steal one. And it felt good, right? Because Carey Price and the Habs are running peak then. The Leafs are the team that's expected to do considerably better this time around. Everyone knows that except for Habs fans, and that's cool. They have to support their crew. So coming back to get this win for them, that's a big deal. For the Leafs, look, it better not become formulaic like it did last year, because the coach will take the fall for that, and then eventually the players will start getting it too. 26 hits for the Habs last night, 19 for the Leafs. John Tavares absolutely plastered by Shea Weber. That's two nights. That's 2 nights in a row the captain gets just doinked. That's part of the game, right? Is that part of the game, or is that not part of the game? Should he be hit at all? And if he should there not be some sort of pushback from his team? The captain just got destroyed. What if he gets concussed? Is it, well, that's just part of the game? But hold on a sec. Is there no more hitting? Is your guy the one who gets totally leveled? I mean, Tavares is doing his thing, right? Who is going to not retaliate, but who's going to reciprocate, Mike, on this Maple Leafs team? Don Cherry pointed it out, and I'm not all knuckle-dragging Neanderthaling here, but it's true.
Well, unless there's a moratorium signed before each game saying, I won't touch your star if you don't touch ours, then it's something that needs to be addressed. I mean, this was a concern last year in the playoffs. This was a concern over the summer when Kyle Dubas went the direction of having a purely skilled team. Now, there's a couple guys on the team that like to hit. But Hyman, when he is back, he likes to rub people up against the boards. Jake Muzzin, CC, there are players. But that being said, in the first couple games, and even last night, Tavares gets laid out by Weber. He gets crumpled, and then Jeff Petrie wastes Mitch Marner and falls on top of him. You cannot let your star players be abused. And again, the fallacy that the power play will be a deterrent is just not realistic. And I don't agree with everything Don Cherry said, but the one thing that I did agree with is when it comes playoff time, if this team is the way it is right now, they may get a round or two, but eventually they'll come up against a team that will have a bee in their bonnet and will exact that physically, and the Leafs will not be able to respond. And they need people on this roster to be able to stand up for their players. Not goons, but guys who will be physical when the other team is physical.
And guess what? We're going to have to wait 7 months to prove that yet again, Mike, because it will bear out. But there's a process between then and now, and the need for this team is to evolve into one that has its eyes on the prize and is set, focused on winning games in the best way it knows how, and then closing out those games with the ability to stand up to the other team, Mike, and deliver hits when hits are being delivered upon them. We can talk about how well the game is changing or it's changed all we want, and then we'll get to the playoffs. The Leafs did win in Columbus on Friday night. That was an interesting game because we got a chance to see just how dominant the Leafs can be and getting up in a game and putting it away. That's a lot of fun. And then obviously the Leafs were on track to do that against Montreal, and then things went pear-shaped. Any quick thoughts on the Columbus game, winning on the road like that? Do you think the Leafs will be a different team when they're away from Scotiabank Arena?
I think they'll play a more conservative game, which I thought they did. I mean, conservative in a good way, not making big mistakes. And their star players who need to carry the ball did carry the ball on Friday in Columbus. I mean, Freddie Anderson was really, really good. He kept them in the game at times when I think Columbus dominated the play. Mitch Marner scores a pair of goals. Austin Matthews with a ridiculous shot. They scored two power play goals. Cody Ceci with a goal. I mean, it was a pretty complete effort, but it was not perfect because at times Columbus was beating them to the play and getting good opportunities on Anderson. But the thing is that you see on Saturday the symptom of Mike Babcock playing mostly three lines and playing his top four over 20 minutes. Last night, I'm not looking at the box score right now, but I doubt Rasmus Sandin broke 10 minutes. I know he didn't break it in Columbus. Marinson and Hall play probably a little more because each of them are involved on the PK. But when you play your fourth line less than 10 minutes, you play your bottom pairing less than 10 minutes, and the second of back-to-back, your top players are going to feel it. And I think they ran out of gas. I mean, Riley had 3 assists on Friday. He played great. On Saturday, he was one of their worst defensemen. He was on the ice, I think, for three goals. And he did not look, I mean, he's a great defenseman, but, you can go to the well one time too often. And 3 games into the season, it shouldn't be that much of a disparity, but I think right now Babcock doesn't trust that fourth line, so he's using them very sparingly.
This doesn't make sense. Wasn't it last spring the criticism on Babcock that he was rolling his lines and that he was playing everybody spread out minutes? Now he's overloading players with too much time too early into the season.
Well, and one thing that he said prior to the game was that basically he's implemented a rotation. On Monday against St. Louis, he'll use Spezza, Patan on the fourth line with Gauthier, and every other game will sub in Nick Shore and Timashov until he decides what is the three or four that he'll go with, and then also include like players who are down on the Marlies. Sorry. Jeremy Bracco had 3 assists yesterday in the opener for the Marlies. Korshkov had a goal and an assist. So, that bottom line, that fourth line, and that bottom pairing are sort of fluid. And that's all fine and good, but you can't have that fourth line be, having a lack of trust in them that you're only going to play them 8 or 9 minutes. Maybe he's sending a message because last year everybody talked about Matthews and Tavares not being played enough, and he'll say, "Okay, you want me to play them? Here, I'm going to play them, but I'm going to overplay them. So I'm going to emphasize what my decision making means, and I'm going to go eventually with what I want to do. But I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's just a coincidence.
We're 3 games in. Kasperi Kapanen's throwing sticks. Mike Babcock's throwing himself under the bus. Let's throw some love at Ilya Mikheyev in just a sec. The Leafs Convo, presented by Oakridge Ford in London, Ontario, continues. Mike, the Leafs are a collective point machine. Providing everyone stays healthy, the Leafs will have among the most goals scored in the league when 82 are complete. If you have any sort of understanding of offensive hockey at all and you can fit into the process, you're going to collect your points if you get the ice time and you don't get into Mike Babcock's doghouse. Ilya Mikheyev, 3 points already in his young NHL career. This guy was signed, Mike, in the spring. What's his story? What does he ultimately bring to this Maple Leafs team? How does he make it better?
Ironically, Babcock appears to have been heavily involved in luring him from the KHL. He's a big winger, not overly tough, but he does use his size, and he's, I think, 6'4". He likes soup, which was funny because he barely speaks English. He had a reporter who speaks both English and Russian there to interpret for him, and he decided to try to handle the scrum in English, which was brave of him and great. And he seems like a good kid with a good personality, and was talking about how he doesn't understand how people don't like soup, which I thought was hilarious. So I started calling him Soup Man. But he provides a skill set that this team doesn't have, in the sense that he has size as opposed to only guys like Matthews who do. He goes in the corners, but he's fast. He has a pretty good shot. He set up, I think it was Trevor Moore, or either Moore or Kerfoot last night for one of the goals. And he has the trust of Babcock. He seems to be capable of playing two-way. He's playing on the penalty kill. He's playing on the third line with Kerfoot and Moore. I think, and we know how Babcock likes to switch things around, especially when a player does something stupid. I would not be surprised, and they're not practicing today, and they play St. Louis on Monday. I would not be surprised if Mikheyev gets moved up to the second line with Tavares and Marner, and Kapanen gets moved down to the third line, just to send a message to Kapanen, because Kapanen has not played well in the 3 games that he admitted it himself, and he's playing on the off wing. So Mikheyev could play the left side, and Kapanen could shift over to the right on the third line. But that's getting away. He scored 23 goals in the KHL last year. I think he's in no danger of being in Babcock's doghouse as long as he keeps playing the way he's playing. And right now, I think he's trying to establish himself in the NHL, and he seems to be doing a pretty good job of it.
Sending a message to Kapanen is redundant. The guy should understand that more is expected of him, especially if you're playing on the second line with Tavares and Marner, who have a combined 8 points right now. Yeah, they get some of those points with the man advantage, but let's not blame guys because they're really good. I'm hoping Kapanen resets here and gets back in business. The stick throwing thing was unacceptable. It was a poor judgment, and no amount of time on the fourth line or being sent to hockey purgatory is going to change the fact that that was a dumb thing to do, and that he most likely won't do it again on Mikheyev. I like these stories, Mike, because it does bring you back to it brings you back to simpler days. Brings you back to the point where the team was still trying to find its way and we were still waiting for players to emerge. The team has so many stars. There's so much expectation placed upon it. We know where we think this team should be, and I believe most of the team thinks it should be there too. A guy like Mikheyev just happy to be in North America playing in the NHL, and whether it's the Maple Leafs or the Arizona Coyotes, I don't think he really cares, and that's interesting and innocent and cute in a lot of ways, because he's just living a dream, and we're all able to witness it, and I hope it continues on.
Yeah, it's a good story, and I think it's a necessary story in terms of success for the Leafs, because, and I was talking with somebody a couple days ago about what this team is going to need to do going forward. Now that they have everybody locked up, Tavares, Marner, Matthews, Kapanen, and Janssen, uh, they need to supplement their core group with cheap talent, either from the Marlies or European free agents like Mikheyev, who they signed, and he's on a 1 year entry level deal. Now the thing is that Babcock's treatment of Spezza, and we're not going to go too much into it because it was territory already well covered, but that's a bad sign because you try to sell a veteran guy next year about coming in and playing a role, and they're going to say, well, what happened to Jason Spezza? And supposedly, I know that I got some heat from somebody in one of my columns that said, well, Babcock was involved in the wooing process of Spezza. Well, you could fool me, because if he made promises that he's going to play a certain role, and it's not the role that he is playing right now, then Babcock, I think, misled Spezza. They need the veteran guys like Spezza. They need the European free agents like Mikheyev to come in and play a role and play it effectively for a low price. And if they can get those players, then it helps that core group not have to score 2 goals every night to
How
stay
does
in
Sheldon
games.
Keefe, if head coach of the Maple Leafs, right now, do any better than what Mike Babcock is doing? Because if he gives Jason Spezza the opportunity to play and contribute as Jason Spezza expected he would when he signed with the team, another player would have to come out of the lineup. Someone else would get less opportunity. And then the argument would be centered more around who's not getting the chance and why is this wily old veteran in the mix. So how does a new coach come in and make everything fine and dandy, as opposed to coming in and bringing a different philosophy, and then the argument's just flipped on its head?
Well, if I had to categorize Keefe's strategy when it comes to roster usage, I would say when you have lemons, you make lemonade. And when it comes to Babcock, if you don't conform to what he has in mind, then he doesn't use you. And, there are players down with the Marlies, and maybe it's easier to do that in the American Hockey League. But, a guy like Bracco is still, I think, a one-way player. He's an offensive player and still challenged defensively. But that doesn't mean that because of that, he doesn't use him. He utilizes him as the offensive player, and he utilizes other players for their strengths. Whereas Babcock, if he's not getting heavy minutes out of Jason Spezza, whereas he was brought in to be a matchup problem to other teams on the fourth line. When you have a guy who is a former star player who can still perform and he can play that kind of role on a fourth line and provide a matchup problem, you utilize that. But he's basically having him take face-offs and penalty kills and trying to play a game that maybe he's not used to. And I think that's a weakness.
I hope Babcock and the Leafs win a cup and then he just goes somewhere else. And that way he is able to get his just desserts. Mike, it's interesting, though, we talk about Bracco and the fact that, he is an offensive dynamo with challenges defensively. You can get away with that in the AHL, but you can't get away with that in the NHL. And you know that. Everyone knows that. When we talk about specialists, if you're a power play specialist or a penalty kill specialist, face-off specialist, that's great, but you can't be an offensive specialist. You can be a defensive specialist, but you can't be an offensive specialist with no qualities on the back end. We understand that. So on Bracco, if this guy still hasn't righted his defensive game, then that's on him. And we know that he'll be dealt somewhere else, and he'll put some points on the board and razzle dazzle, and then all of a sudden he will slip into obscurity. Because we know, Mike, you have to bring your full 200-foot game, your 3-zone game. You have to, and if you don't, I mean, you will never get anywhere. Especially, you will not be a major part of any team. And I'm not crapping on Bracco here, but I think the point is, making lemonade out of lemons and using guys the way they need to be used. In the AHL, you can get away with that. In the NHL, there is the onus is on you to be a complete player.
You're correct, but let's just say this: Bracco is in his second full season with the Marlies. He played half of the year 2 years ago. And yeah, he is still challenged defensively, but there are players in this league that are challenged defensively, but they're playing in the top 9. And in this instance, Bracco would only be a fourth liner. And if you're a fourth liner, you can't play that way. But if he was playing on a scoring line with Matthews or Tavares, then his defensive inabilities would not be as much of in question, because William Nylander, at least early in his career, he's maybe better now and stronger now, but early on, he was that defensive liability at times. I'm just saying that, there's a player that is not perfect, does not have a well-rounded game, but is utilized for his strengths. He is a demon on the power play. He's one of the best playmakers in the organization, not on the Marlies, in the organization. He had 3 assists yesterday in the Marlies' victory over Belleville. I'm just saying, eventually that guy is going to be utilized either by them or in a trade for something that will help them.
He is a surplus on this team, and we know that. Unless he was a 3-zone dynamo, then right now he's laying in wait. And I'm a pro Bracco guy. I want to see him play. But anyone who has capabilities in a large percentage in one area of the game, but lacks in another area and has some tenure professionally, needs to do whatever it takes to improve the game. And you bring up Nylander. Nylander knows that he has to improve game in and game out. Mitch Marner came into the league as a 3-zone, 200-foot player. Doesn't get enough credit for being that, because he does put up so many points. I think what I'm trying to say is that it's the responsibilities on each and every one of these players to evolve, and then that leads us back to the head coach. Is the head coach evolving? And if he isn't, what is it? Just some sort of dictatorial environment where it's the coach's way or the highway, no matter what? Yeah, what you did 10, 15 years ago was fantastic, but does it really apply to how you're going to achieve success now? Final word to you, Mike.
Yeah, I don't think head coaches, especially head coaches with success, evolve. I think they stay with what they know, what they've known wins, and then it's up to the player to conform to what he wants. And that's what you have in Babcock, good or bad. I think, this team is going, and the players, especially the role players who play on the fourth line. And he said yesterday that, it's going to be about 10 games of them rotating players in and out before he starts to make decisions and narrows things down. So you're going to see this for most of the month. You're going to see Michael Hutchinson play 4 games in October. And, once they get through the first month, then there'll probably be sort of a filtering out process. But the star players are not going to go anywhere. It's the role players that are going to either be there or not.
This is another 100-point season for the Maple Leafs. How are they going to put together that 100 points? Are we going to feel great about it when all is said and done and the playoffs are next? Or are we still going to have concerns? I think it's going to be somewhere in the middle, Mike. And then if this team finds its way at the right time, I think it could win a Stanley Cup. The St. Louis Blues, the Stanley Cup champions, are next. I like it because it's an early indication of the possibility of the Maple Leafs potentially succeeding the St. Louis Blues. So let's give it a run and see what happens, Michael. Talk to you soon.